Hello friends, a very good day to you. Today we shall be talking about revolutionary nationalism. And while discussing about revolutionary nationalism, it is very important to note that revolutionary nationalism is of the same importance as the mainstream nationalism of this period. Revolutionary nationalism is also a very important part of the history of the formation of this nation, the history of the rise of this nation as a unit. Okay, of course, the activities of the revolutionary nationalists, the activities of these revolutionary organizations are ingrained in our social fabric. The sacrifices made by the revolutionaries, such as those made by Bhagat Singh, those made by Chandrasekhar Azad, are part of our national fabric, are part of our social fabric. And these stories are the stories which are associated, the stories of the sacrifices are the stories which are associated with our national identity as Indians, all right. But before we proceed into a history of the revolutionary nationalists and revolutionary nationalism phase of the Indian national movement, let us understand certain core concepts, among which the concept of hegemony is of great importance. Why do we have to know about hegemony? Now, British rule in India has been called by scholars as a hegemonic rule. Okay, and a hegemonic rule is a kind of an autocratic rule which you see is all pervasive in nature. It is part and parcel of everybody's economic, political and social life. The entire life, the entire living day of a subject is subsumed by this idea of hegemony of the ruling order of in such autocratic governments. Okay, British rule of course is a hegemonic form of government. Now, hegemonic form of government is predicated upon two very important aspects of the entire structure of governance. The two important, so they can also be called cultural aspects. Okay, these two very important cultural aspects which are part of the hegemonic structure of such governments, such autocratic governments, are legitimacy and the power to punish. Okay, dispensation of punishment. We have to know that there is a differentiation between justice and punishment, and these kind of governments are not predicated upon the dispensation of justice, which is dispensation of justice is based upon constitutionalism. Okay, but these kind of governments are not constitutional, based upon constitutionalism. This kind of governments usurp the power to punish. This is a power to exact justice, not dispose justice. Okay, and of course they have legitimacy on their side. These kind of governments make incredible investments in the cultural field, in the social field, to legitimize their rule in India. They create an entire superstructure of language. They create an entire superstructure of language of dominion. They create an entire superstructure of education and cultural superiority in order to legitimize their rule in India. In sorry, not India, but in their rule, this kind of government's rule in any place. But in India, the British also proceeded through this modality in order to legitimize their rule. What can be said as the white burden argument. Okay, and because of the legitimacy which was assumed by the British, the argument that we are here to civilize and that our rule is providential in nature, because of this legitimacy that was assumed by the British, we see that they also take on the power to punish, they take on the power to discipline, in order to achieve their goals. Okay, however, at the very base of this relationship, the relationship between the colonized and the masters, colonial master, at the very base is economic exploitation. This is the basic modality of such governments. But the superstructure of course is based upon legitimacy and the power to punish. Okay, now when we are reading about the national movement, we always come across the carrot and stick technique, which has been known as the carrot and stick technique. They fall neatly within the ambit of the two important aspects of hegemonic government. The carrot being an attempt at legitimizing their rule, the stick being exaction of discipline, okay, in order to propagate their rule. This can also be said to be conciliation and confrontation. Very important to remember that the national movement, be it the revolutionary nationalism through the modality of individual heroic action and through the modalities of revolutionary acts, or national movement through the modality of non-violent satyagraha, both of these two strands of national movement, they try to attack these two aspects of the British rule in India. They tried to attack the legitimacy of the British rule in India, and they also tried to subvert the British power to punish and to discipline. All right. How do they delegitimize the British rule in India? By proving to the people, by spreading awareness to the masses that British rule is not exactly as benevolent as it is considered. That the, you see, what Bipin Chandra had somewhere described as the Mai Baap attitude, that it has to be, it has to be done away with, okay. That this attitude towards the British, that they are a benevolent autocratic masters who should be followed because they are embarking upon a, a mission to civilize the East, okay. This should be done away with. This is not the argument which can be used to legitimize the rule in India. In fact, the rule in India is not legitimate at all. This was done by the Congress through their own modality and by revolutionary nationalists through their own modality. But you see, they both tried to delegitimize British rule in India. We will understand how they tried to do it, and then both, you see, tried to delegitimize the British premise that they control the authority to punish, okay. How did the revolutionary nationalists do it? By subverting and by actively, you see, subverting their British power to punish, and by proving that British rule in India is not invincible, that you see, although the British can punish, the British can also be punished. If they can punish, they can also be punished, okay, by carrying out activities which are subversive in nature, by, you see, murders, political killings, okay, they can also be punished, and that their rule is not ironclad, that they cannot rule indefinitely, but they can also be challenged, okay. So this is how they together try to, you see, the Congress and the revolutionary nationalists, okay, both of these strands of the national movement, both of them tried to attack the hegemonic rule of the British in India. Although their modalities were different, the course taken were different, the means were different, the end, of course, was same, that is attacking the hegemony of British rule in India. In the next section, we will proceed into an understanding of the, you see, the rise of the revolutionary nationalist movement in India. Now let us discuss the rise of revolutionary nationalism in India. And while discussing the rise of revolutionary nationalism in India, it is important to remember that it takes place in two phases, okay. The first phase is in the context of the early nationalism. The first phase is also in the context of the rise of you see, the partition of Bengal, and the rise of early nationalism in context of the partition of Bengal, okay. And the second phase is in the context of what has been called the failures of the non-cooperation Khilafat movement, the failure of the Satyagraha mode, which was perceived as the failure of the Satyagraha mode, and therefore now we will discuss the part 1, okay, the first phase. And in the first phase, Bengal takes a place of precedence, because it is in Bengal where by 1902 the earliest revolutionary nationalist units and organizations come up. One such organization is, of course, the Anushilan Samiti, okay. Anushilan Samiti formed by Pramodha Mithal, okay, with its headquarters in Calcutta, and there is another Anushilan Samiti formed in East Bengal by Pulin Das with its headquarters in Dhaka. All right. So, the two Anushilon Samitis are very important because these are some of the first revolutionary nationalist organizations that you see come up in Bengal. Important people like Barindra Kumar Ghosh and you see Bhupendranath Datta, they are associated with the Anushilon Samiti, and later on they start publishing Yugantar. Okay. Yugantar being one of the first revolutionary nationalist you see newspapers that is published during this period. There are other newspapers also such as Kal, Sandhya, okay. But Yugantar as a you see publication, it is important because an entire group forms around this publication of the Yugantar, which later came to be described as the Yugantar group, okay. And people in the Yugantar group were originally affiliated to the Anushilon Samiti itself, people like Barindra Kumar Ghosh and Bhupendranath Datta, okay. These people who are associated with the Yugantar were also members of the Anushilon Samiti. Because of the formation of this revolutionary nationalist organization, this underground organization, there are also a spate of political killings and a spate of political conspiracies during this period. Now, remember the modality of action as we discussed of this revolutionary organization and revolutionary nationalists, okay. The modality of action is that of you see individual heroism and conspiracies and what do you call and what has been called you see political murders, okay. So, Khudiram Bose and Prafulla Chaki are important in this regard because these two individuals had attempted the murder of Kingsford, a notorious judge of Muzaffarnagar. They had attempted a murder, they had attempted the murder of Kingsford, one of the notorious judges of Muzaffarnagar, okay, by an attempt at bombing him. But unfortunately, Kingsford was not killed, but some other victims who were innocent, they had died, and therefore, you see, Prafulla Chaki had committed suicide, and Khudiram Bose himself was you see put on trial because of this attempted murder of Kingsford, okay. And there were other people also involved in such attempts such as Sachin Sanyal and Ras Bihari Bose. Sachin Sanyal and Ras Bihari Bose are also important organizationally, but we will talk about that later. But Sachin Sanyal and Ras Bihari Bose, you should understand that in 1912 they had attempted the murder of Viceroy Hardinge at Delhi. So, these kind of individual acts of attempted you see murders, political murders and attempted bombings, these kind of anarchic activities were commonplace as far as the actions of the revolutionary nationalists are concerned, okay. And while talking about revolutionary nationalism, we must also not omit Maharashtra, where you see V.D. Savarkar and his brother Ganesh Savarkar are actively involved in revolutionary activities, and together they had also formed previously the Mitra Mela, which comes up in 1904, and the later on what has been called the Abhinav Bharat. Abhinav Bharat, which is an organization which is modeled after Garibaldi's Young India, Young Italy, and Abhinav Bharat of course means Young India, and therefore, you see the ideological context of the formation of these revolutionary organizations also. They are inspired by international movements, and they are also inspired by international ideologies of nationalism, alright. And in this period, you see that there is also an attempt made at Pune at the life of the Plague Commissioner of Pune, okay. The Chapekar brothers make an attempt at the life of the Plague Commissioner of Pune. His name is Rand, and an associate of this particular Mr. Rand, that is Lieutenant Ayers. So we see that revolutionary activities and are very commonplace during this period. There are spate of murders, the spate of attempted murders and spate of terrorist activities, what has been described as of course terrorist activities during this period. But chief among those during this period is that of the Ghadar party and what they tried to organize during the First World War. The Ghadar party, which is based out of San Francisco, okay, the Ghadar party, which is an international party based out of San Francisco and whose modality also included sabotaging the loyalty of Indian troops which are stationed abroad, okay, and whose modality also modalities of action also included the procurement of arms and then supplying those arms to revolutionary organizations. The Ghadar party takes lead in trying to sabotaging the British war effort during the First World War. The Ghadar party becomes important during the First World War, and in this context, in the context of the Ghadar party, we should also remember Sachin Sanyal and Ras Bihari Bose are very important in the context of the First World War and the Ghadar party, because Sachin Sanyal and Ras Bihari Bose were actively involved in organizationally trying to bring together the various organizations, revolutionary organizations within India and the activities of the Ghadar party. We see that these individuals which are aligning themselves with particular revolutionary organizations, they do not stick to their own organizations, but they also try to form linkages because they understand that a united effort is also very necessary in order to win in their activities against the British. So, Ghadar party, of course, most of us we have heard about the Komagata Maru incident, okay. The Komagata Maru incident is the particular incident, is the trigger which makes the Ghadarites more recalcitrant and which makes the Ghadarites return to India in order to exact what they understand as justice against the British, okay. So, what is the Komagata Maru incident? The Komagata Maru incident relates to an incident that occurred in Canada, whereby a ship, a Japanese ship by the name of Komagata Maru, which was hired in order to transport somewhere around 370 Indians from Singapore to Canada. When they reached Canada, these 370 individuals were denied permission to disembark in Canada, okay, and they were sent back again to India, to Calcutta, okay. They were sent back again to Calcutta because it is believed that the Canadian authorities at that point of time were colluding with the British authorities, and therefore they denied permission to these individuals to disembark in Canada and start a new life in Canada, okay. And therefore, when they returned to Calcutta and they were asked to board trains to Punjab, these people, these individuals who were in the ship, who were on the ship, they refused to board those trains, and in the scuffle that ensued, somewhere around 22 people died, okay. And this galvanized the Ghadarites to return to India, and after the Ghadarites returned to India, they organized various activities within India during the First World War. During the peak of the First World War, they organized various activities of sabotage. They organized various activities of sabotage in the form of landing German weapons in India. They also tried to organize rebellions in barracks, such as the barracks of Lahore, Ferozpur, okay. They organized rebellions in the barracks at Lahore, Firozpur. They tried to sabotage the loyalty of the soldiers who were fighting on the side, Indian soldiers who were fighting on the side of the British. So, these kind of sabotage activities were carried out, but because it is said that the Ghadar party's organizational structure was weak and that there was weak leadership in the Ghadar party, and also because of individual treachery within the party, all of these attempts, they failed. And at that point of time, we should also remember that the 1915 promulgation of the Defence of India Acts, okay, the Defence of India rules, is armed the British with the necessary clout in order to challenge all of these revolutionary activities, because the Defence of India rules, it armed the British with the necessary legislative ammunition, so that all of these revolutionary activities and revolutionaries can be legitimately attacked. And you see, the entire movement within India, it has to subside in the face of this unprecedented British repression against the revolutionaries. Most of these revolutionaries are caught, most of them are hanged, and most of them are also transported for life. So we see that during this period, we also see the coming up of international organizations, because some of these revolutionaries such as Raj Bihari Bose himself, he flees to Japan. Okay, there are other members of the Anushilon Samiti, members of the Yugantar group who flee to Germany, and there they also formed the Berlin Committee. Okay, Berlin Committee for the independence of India. Berlin Committee for the Independence of India is formed in Berlin under the Zimmermann Plan, according to which active support was given by the German Foreign Office in the sabotage sabotage activities of individuals from other nations, okay, so that Germany gains an upper hand against the nations which are fighting against Germany. So by the Zimmermann Plan, the Berlin Committee is also formed, and the Berlin Committee also tries to raise awareness amongst the international Indian community and also amongst international Indian troops which are fighting abroad. They try to raise the awareness against British rule in India, and they try to organize activities against the British rule in India during the time of the war. Alright. So these activities and these organizations included, they formed the first phase of what has been known as the phase of revolutionary nationalism in India. Now, looking at their modality, you should understand, and you see, from our discussion of the promulgation of what has been called the Defence of India Act, we should also understand that these activities of these groups are fringe activities. The activities of this group you see cannot be considered legitimate from a nationalist, not nationalistic, but from a constitutional perspective. Now, what is important here to understand is that in order to delegitimize British rule in India, while talking about hegemony, we talked about the two very important aspects, that is legitimacy and the power to punish. Now, they were trying, of course, to delegitimize the British rule in India by pointing out the failures of the British and pointing out the depredation of the British in their, you see, activities in India. Okay, but while doing so, they took the road of individual heroic action. They also took the road of violence. By committing violence, they are indeed not delegitimizing the British, but in fact legitimizing any action against them from the side of the British. Okay, any action against these revolutionary activities and these revolutionary organizations, okay, any action against them can be considered a legitimate action because of the use of violence in their modality of action. So therefore, the promulgation of the Defence of India Act cannot be seen as a illegitimate promulgation, illegitimate act, because such an act can be easily legitimized by pointing at the various attempts by these revolutionary nationalists in their pursuance of the freedom for India. But however, we should also remember that they are important in the sense that they pointed out, that the British power in India can be challenged, that the British are not invincible, that they are not the only one who holds the exclusive permit to punish. Okay, they can also be punished for their activities in India and for their depredations in India, and by doing so, they in their own way, galvanize the youth of the nation. They prove to the youth of the nation that the British are not invincible and that they can be challenged. All right. So this in brief is the history of the first phase of revolutionary nationalism in India. In our second part of this video, we will talk about the second phase of revolutionary nationalism in India, and then we will talk about the causes for the rise of revolutionary nationalism in India. With that, I take your leave.